As Thomas Blackwood looked out the window at his new home, the wheels of the carriage rattled against the cobblestone streets of Charleston. The heat in South Carolina was unbearable in July 1839, and even at night, the air was thick and still. Thomas wiped his forehead with his handkerchief, which was already wet with sweat even though the sun had set. "Almost there, sir," the driver said back. "Magnolia Manor is just ahead." Thomas had come all the way from Boston to work as a tutor for the daughters of Elijah Thornton, one of the richest plantation owners in Charleston. The job promised a good salary and a nice place to live, which would let him send money back to his sick mother in Massachusetts. Thomas saw the manor for the first time as the carriage got closer to the wrought iron gates. It was a grand 3-story building with big white columns and verandas on each level. Spanish moss hung from the old oak trees that lined the long driveway. In the evening breeze, it moved like ghostly fingers. "Isn't it beautiful?" Thomas's trance was broken by the driver's voice. The Thornton estate is Charleston's pride. But even though it was very hot, something about the property made Thomas feel uneasy. It might have been the stark difference between the clean white front of the main house and the row of small worn cabins in the distance. These were the slave quarters, which reminded Thomas of the institution that many Northerners of his time found increasingly troubling. The carriage stopped in front of the steps. Thomas gathered his things and walked up to the entrance, where an old butler was waiting for him. "Mr. Welcome to Magnolia Manor, Blackwood. My name is Frederick, and I am in charge of the household staff. Mrs. Thornton is waiting for you in the drawing room." Thomas followed Frederick through the big entrance hall, where there were portraits of stern-faced ancestors on the walls. Their eyes seemed to follow his every move, showing that they didn't like this northern intruder in their southern territory. There were beautiful French furniture and fine silk curtains in the drawing room. There was a woman of about 40 standing by the fireplace. Her posture was perfect, and her dark hair was pulled back tightly and had silver streaks in it. "Mister, I guess it's Blackwood." Her voice was sweet, but cold. "I am Mrs. Eleanor Thornton. My husband is in Savannah for work, but he sends his best wishes." Thomas bent down a little. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Thornton. Thank you for letting me help your daughters with their schoolwork." "Yes, Charlotte and Elizabeth need to go to school. They've used up all the knowledge that our previous tutors had." There was something in her face that made it seem like this wasn't a full compliment to her daughter's intelligence. "Harvard says good things about you. I hope you like your accommodations." A young black woman walked in quietly, looking down. "This is Ruth." Mrs. Thornton said this in a dismissive way. "She will show you to your room and take care of your needs." Thomas saw a door that was slightly open across the hall as he followed Ruth out of the room. He saw a girl of about 16, looking at him with wide, scared eyes through the crack before the door quickly closed. Ruth took him to the east wing of the house, to a nice room on the second floor. "Your room, sir," she said quietly, still not looking at him. "Thanks, Ruth," Thomas said as he put down his case. He asked, "Is there something else?" when she didn't leave right away. Ruth hesitated and looked nervously at the open door. "Be careful here, sir," she said in a voice so low he almost missed it. "Things at Magnolia Manor aren't what they look like." She rushed out of the room before Thomas could ask her anything. All he had was her strange warning and the sound of a woman's muffled sobs coming from somewhere deep within the manor's walls. That night, Thomas had trouble falling asleep. The strange sounds of the southern night, like cicadas chirping and the occasional distant wail that could have been a screech owl, kept him awake. But what really worried him was Ruth's warning. What wasn't what it seemed at Magnolia Manor, and whose sobs had he heard? The sun shone so brightly through Thomas's window that it woke him up. He got dressed and then followed Frederick's directions to the breakfast room, where he would meet his students for the first time. When he walked in, the sisters were already at the table. Charlotte, who was 16 and older, had her mother's sharp features, but they were softer because she was young. Elizabeth, who was probably 14, was shorter and looked more fragile. She was nervous, which showed in her constantly fidgeting hands. "Good morning, Mr. Charlotte," greeted Blackwood formally, standing up straight. "We hope you had a good night's sleep at Magnolia Manor." "Quite comfortable, thank you," Thomas said. as he sat down in the chair that Frederick had pointed out. "I'm excited to start your lessons today." Mrs. Thornton walked in and immediately drew everyone's attention. "Mister, I see that you and Charlotte and Elizabeth have met, Blackwood. Your main job will be to take care of them, but you may also be asked to teach the children of the household staff some basic things from time to time." It was clear that the last part was added with anger. The conversation at breakfast was stiff. Thomas said that Elizabeth hardly spoke at all. She only answered when someone spoke to her directly, and even then, it was only a few whispered words. Charlotte, on the other hand, acted like someone much older. She answered questions about her love of music and literature with practiced accuracy. After dinner, Thomas went to the Manor's library with the girls. It was a beautiful room with big windows that looked out over the garden and bookshelves that went all the way up to the ceiling. "This is where they would have their lessons," Charlotte said. "Your last tutor left very suddenly," as she picked up a book from the shelf. "Mother says he wasn't good enough, but the staff says something else." "Charlotte!" Elizabeth hissed, and her eyes got big with fear. "What are they saying?" Thomas asked. His curiosity piqued. Charlotte's lips formed a small, secretive smile. That he saw something in the West Wing that he shouldn't have. She and her sister looked at each other. "Mr. Smith, we can't go there, and you can't either. Blackwood, Lizzie, wasn't Mother very clear about that?" Elizabeth nodded a lot. "Please don't go there," she said softly, her voice full of fear. Thomas was about to ask more questions when Ruth came in with a tray of tea. She set down the tray and said, "Your morning refreshment." Thomas saw that she had bruises on her wrist that were mostly hidden by her sleeve as she poured the tea. Ruth saw him looking at her and quickly pulled the fabric down. Thomas tried to steer the conversation back to their studies after she left, but he couldn't stop thinking about the West Wing and Ruth's bruises. What did Magnolia Manor keep a secret? The girls' knowledge was tested in the morning. Charlotte was very smart, especially when it came to languages and literature. Elizabeth was great at math, but she didn't have a lot of confidence and often looked to her sister for help before answering questions. Thomas watched the sisters talk to each other while they ate lunch. Charlotte was protective of Elizabeth, but there was something controlling about how she acted, as if she were guarding not only her sister, but also information. After lunch, Mrs. Thornton told Thomas that the girls were having music practice, which gave him a few hours to himself. "You can look around the grounds if you want," she said. "Frederick can show you around the gardens. This time of year, they're very nice." Her tone made it clear that this was not just a suggestion, but an order for him to spend his free time. "Thanks, Mrs. I would love to see the gardens, Thornton." Thomas saw a man on horseback coming toward the house as Frederick led him outside. He was tall and broad-shouldered, and his posture suggested power. "Mr. Thornton is back from Savannah early," Frederick said, sounding surprised. Thomas watched as Elijah Thornton got off his horse and gave the reins to a slave who was waiting. The plantation owner's eyes moved over the land before settling on Thomas. Thomas could feel the weight of that stare, even from a distance. It was judging, calculating, and somehow threatening. "Come, Mr. Blackwood," Frederick said, suddenly wanting to leave. "This way to the rose garden." As Thomas walked away, he looked back and saw Thornton still watching him. His stance was so still and predatory that it sent another chill down Thomas's spine, even though it was a hot summer day. That night, dinner was a test of how polite you could be. Elijah Thornton sat at the head of the table. He had dark hair with silver streaks and piercing gray eyes that made him look like he was in charge. Even though he smiled and talked to Thomas in a friendly way, there was something cold about him that made Thomas uneasy. "You say Harvard?" Thornton said, cutting into his roast duck with skill. "A great place to learn. And what makes a northern academic come to Charleston? There must be jobs that are closer to home, right?" "The chance seemed perfect," Thomas said carefully. "I've always wanted to see different parts of our country." Thornton's smile didn't show in his eyes. "Very different. Mr. Smith, you'll see that we do things a little differently in the South. Blackwood, we have our own traditions to keep." Mrs. Thornton watched this conversation with a blank face, while Charlotte kept her perfect posture and looked at her father every so often with what Thomas recognized as carefully hidden fear. Elizabeth didn't eat much of her food and kept her eyes on her plate. "Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood will need to know what we expect from the girls' education," Thornton smoothly added, especially our focus on proper behavior and the social skills that young ladies of their station should have. Of course, Thornton said, but I hope he doesn't forget about the classics. A lady should be skilled, but not too much of a know-it-all. He looked at Charlotte instead. Did you do what I told you to do and practice your French writing? Yes, Father, Charlotte said. Mr. Blackwood has already seen how far I've come. Very good. Thornton's eyes moved to his younger daughter. And you, Elizabeth, have you gotten over being shy with our new teacher? Elizabeth's hands shook a little as she said, I'm trying, Father. Try harder, he said, and there was no room for discussion in his voice. Being shy is not a good trait for a Thornton. Thornton kept talking about local politics and business for the rest of the meal. Thomas saw that everyone in the house seemed to revolve around the man, changing how they acted based on his moods and preferences. After dinner, Thornton asked Thomas to come to his study for brandy. Thomas knew this was really a command. The study had dark wood paneling and hunting trophies on the walls. It was very manly and imposing. There was a big desk at one end of the room, and it was covered in ledgers and letters. Sit, Mr. Blackwood, Thornton said as he poured 2 snifters of amber liquid. I think it's important to be honest with the people I work with. You come from the North, where some people have strong opinions about how we live. Thomas took the brandy with care. I promise you, mister, I'm just here to help you, Thornton. Yes, indeed, and that is all you will ever be. Thornton's voice got harder. The only thing you care about is my daughter's education. I am the only one who is in charge of my home and my things. It was clear what they wanted Thomas to do. Ignore anything he might see about how the enslaved people were being treated on the plantation. I get it, sir. Do you? Also, know that I won't put up with people getting in my business. Thornton stood up, and his big body cast a shadow over the desk. Now go back to taking care of my daughters, and don't forget, Mr. Blackwood, old houses often have ears in the walls. Thomas was upset and angry when he got back to the library. There, he found that their mother had joined the sisters, Mrs. Thornton was teaching them how to write letters correctly, and her voice was short and clear. Mr. Blackwood, she said, nodding coolly to show she knew he was back. The girls will be going to a party at the Pembrokes tomorrow night. I expect them to be able to talk about current events and literature in a smart way. Maybe you could plan today's lessons around that. Of course, Mrs. Thornton. After she left, Thomas tried to get back to studying, but his mind kept going back to Thornton's ledger. What kinds of records did it have, and how did it relate to the mysteries of Magnolia Manor? Thomas made a choice that afternoon, while the sisters were busy with their music lesson. He quickly found the ledger that Thornton had been looking at when he slipped into the empty study. He opened it with shaking hands and found 2 sets of records, not just one. The first one looked like a normal plantation account book, with crops, costs, and purchases. But there were also entries in a different hand that recorded births, ages, and strange notes. A star marked some names, while a cross marked others. The last page had Mercy's name crossed out and the words "infant male viable" next to it. The sound of footsteps coming closer made Thomas quickly put the ledger back. Frederick came in just as he was leaving the desk. Mr. Blackwood, the old butler said, his voice full of surprise. Is there something I can help you with? I was looking for a book about American history, Thomas said on the spot. Mr. Thornton said that he had a lot of them in his collection. Frederick's face showed that he didn't believe this explanation, but he just said, Sir, the family's personal library is separate from the teaching library. Please send me a list of any extra books you need, and I will see what I can do to get them for you. Thomas felt Frederick's eyes on him as he left the study. This was another reminder that he was always being watched at Magnolia Manor. That night, Doctor came to dinner with the family. Reynolds, the doctor Thomas had heard about in relation to Mercy's problems. The doctor was in his 60s, had a shock of white hair, and wore round glasses. He walked with the confidence of someone who was used to being respected. Dr. Mrs. Reynolds has come to see how Charlotte is doing. As they sat down, Thornton explained. The doctor cheerfully told them, It's just a mild inflammation of the lungs, nothing serious. He also said that the summer heat can make these conditions worse. Thomas hadn't seen any respiratory problems in his older student, but Charlotte nodded her head in agreement. "And while I'm here," Dr. Reynolds went on, looking at Thornton, "I'll check out the new arrival as you asked. After the meal, I've had him brought to the West Wing to get ready." Thomas almost dropped his fork. The new person could only be Mercy's baby son, but why would he be taken to the West Wing, which is off limits, instead of staying with the other enslaved people? And why did Charlotte need to see a doctor when she didn't seem sick? As the meal went on, Thomas became more and more suspicious of the people around him. Dr. Reynolds and Thornton talked about the arrangement and previous successes in vague terms, while Mrs. Thornton stayed calm and looked at her daughters every now and then, with a blank look on her face. After the meal, the men went to drink brandy, but Thomas was not invited. Alone in the drawing room with Mrs., Thomas asked Thornton and the girls a carefully worded question. "I hope Miss Charlotte's health gets better soon. Is your condition new?" Before Charlotte could say anything, "Mrs. Charlotte has always had weak lungs," Thornton said. "Blackwood. Sadly, it's in the family." "I understand." Thomas looked at Elizabeth. "And you, Miss Elizabeth, do you have this trait in your family?" The younger girl looked very pale. "I don't know, sir." "Elizabeth has been blessed with good health," Mrs. Thornton said with certainty. "Okay, girls, it's time to read before bed. Mister, you can go to bed now, Blackwood." Thomas stayed up that night putting the pieces of the puzzle together. The doctor's visit, the forbidden West Wing, Mercy's child, and the strange entries in the ledger all pointed to something bad happening at Magnolia Manor, but he still couldn't get the whole picture. Thomas heard footsteps outside his door going toward the West Wing as the grandfather clock in the hall struck midnight. He got up quietly, opened his door a little, and saw Doctor. As they walked away, Reynolds and Thornton were talking a lot. The doctor said, "This is the best specimen yet. We might have used her again if the mother had lived." As they turned the corner, their voices faded away, leaving Thomas with an ever-growing sense of dread about what might be happening behind the locked doors of Magnolia Manor's West Wing. The next morning, the manor was hot and stuffy. Mrs. interrupted Thomas's lessons with the girls. Thornton burst into the library and said that they would be getting ready for the evening's social event sooner than planned. She said, "The Pembrokes have moved their gathering to make room for more guests from Columbia. The girls have to look their best." Thomas had some free time that he didn't expect, so he decided to walk around the grounds in the hopes of talking to Ruth and learning more about Mercy's child. But as he went down the main stairs, he ran into Frederick. "Mr. Blackwood," the butler said in a stiff voice, "Mrs. Thornton thought you might like to go to town this afternoon, getting the carriage ready." Thomas knew what the suggestion was, a way to get him off the property while whatever was going on in the West Wing went on. "That's very nice of you, but I need to take care of some business. Maybe another day." Frederick's face didn't change, but his eyes got a little harder. Mrs. Thornton was the most adamant. "In fact, she set up a meeting for you with Professor Caldwell at the Charleston Athenaeum. He'll be waiting for you at 2. Thomas had to do what the Thorntons wanted because they had him in their plans. The ride in the carriage to Charleston took almost an hour. During that time, he tried to talk to the driver in the hopes of learning more about the secrets of Magnolia Manor. "How long have you been with the Thornton family?" he asked in a casual way. "Born on the property, sir," the man said without looking around. "Like my father before me." "Then you know the family well." The cautious answer was, "Know my place, sir." "And what about the West Wing of the house? What goes on there?" At this, the driver became very stiff. "Sir, it's not my business to know. Not yours either." The meeting with Professor Caldwell, which was clearly set up to be a distraction, took up most of the afternoon. Even though the professor was interesting and their talk about educational philosophies was interesting, Thomas kept thinking about Magnolia Manor and its secrets. It was getting dark by the time the carriage brought him back to the plantation. The Thornton family had left for their social event, so the house was quiet. Thomas took the chance to look for Ruth, hoping she might know something about Mercy's son. He saw her in the kitchen, where she was helping the other staff members get ready for dinner. Her eyes got big with fear. When she saw Thomas come in, she whispered, "You shouldn't be here, sir," and looked nervously at the other servants. "I need to talk to you about the child," Thomas said over and over. Ruth's face closed right away. "I don't know anything about any child, sir." The other people in the kitchen had stopped talking and were clearly uncomfortable watching them. Thomas knew that being so open with Ruth was putting her in danger. "I'm sorry," he said as he backed away. "I must have gotten you mixed up with someone else." Martha came into the kitchen with a lot of linens in her arms as he was about to leave. When she saw Thomas, she stopped for a second before going to a side door and bumping into him on purpose as she passed. "East Garden after dark," she said in a voice so low that only he could hear. Thomas spent the next few hours in his room trying to sort through his thoughts and the evidence he had found. The ledger entries, the visit to the doctor, and Thornton's veiled threats all pointed to something terrible and systematic happening at Magnolia Manor. Thomas carefully made his way to the East Garden when it got dark. The garden was a formal arrangement of roses and topiaries that had many hidden spots for secret meetings. He saw Martha waiting behind a big camellia bush. In the dim light of the moon, she looked serious. "You're a fool to keep asking questions," she said right away. "They'll kick you out, or worse." Thomas kept saying, "I need to know what's going on here. Where is Mercy's baby? What was the reason for taking him to the West Wing?" Martha let out a big sigh. "You still don't get it, do you? Mercy wasn't just a slave. She was worth a lot. Chosen just for you." "Chosen for what?" "For breeding," Martha said with a snarl. "Thornton has a plan. He and the doctor pick women they think will have good babies, strong boys who will sell for a lot of money, or girls who might." She stopped for a moment, as if she was having trouble with the words. Girls who could keep the cycle going. Thomas started to get a cold understanding. That's where they look at them, test them, and decide how much they're worth. Martha's voice shook with anger that she was trying to hide. "Mercy's son will live in the house until he is old enough to be sold to one of Thornton's friends as a personal servant. He'll cost 3 times as much as a field hand. And what about the girls in the quarters? The ones in his ledger with stars next to them?" Martha's eyes got a little bigger when she saw how much he knew about the ledger. "Those are the ones they're keeping an eye on until they're old enough to." She didn't have to finish, though. It was becoming clear what the terrible secret business at Magnolia Manor was. A systematic program of breeding people, done with the same clinical precision as raising livestock, but on people. Does Thornton know?" Thomas asked, remembering how calm she was. Martha laughed with a lot of anger. "Do you know? She keeps the records and chooses with the doctor. The master makes the business connections, but she's the one who keeps track of the stock." Thomas was sick to his stomach. "And what about Charlotte and Elizabeth? How much do they know?" "Charlotte knows it all. They're getting her ready to take over when the time is right." Martha's voice got even lower. "Elizabeth is kept more innocent, but she knows more than they think. That's why she's always scared." They both got tense when they heard a noise from the house. Martha stepped back into the dark. "I've already said too much. If they knew I was talking to you—" "What do I do?" Thomas asked in a desperate voice. "This can't go on." "Do?" Martha's voice sounded empty. "There's nothing that can be done. This is Charleston, sir. Blackwood. The law protects men like Thornton, not the people they enslave, not even northern teachers with bad morals. There has to be something." "Leave," Martha said sharply. "Get out of Magnolia Manor before you learn its secrets. That's all I can tell you." With that, she slipped away into the dark, leaving Thomas alone with the heavy burden of what he knew and the impossible moral choice he had to make. Thomas had a hard time sleeping because he couldn't stop thinking about what Martha had told him. He had made up his mind by morning. He wouldn't leave Magnolia Manor yet, not while there was still a chance, no matter how small, of revealing the terrible things that were happening behind its beautiful facade. The Thornton family got home late from their social event, which gave Thomas a chance to have breakfast alone in peace. He could tell right away that something was different when Charlotte and Elizabeth finally showed up for their lessons around noon. Charlotte was even more stiff and composed than usual, and Elizabeth looked like she had been crying because her eyes were red and swollen. "How are you, Miss Elizabeth?" Thomas asked softly, as they got comfortable in the library. The girl nodded without saying anything and looked away. "Mister, we're both fine," Charlotte said. "Blackwood," for her sister. "Just tired from what I did last night. Should we keep going with our French translation?" Thomas watched the sisters closely during the whole lesson. Charlotte's recitation was still perfect, but it was a little fragile today. Elizabeth, on the other hand, had a harder time than usual. Her hands shook a little as she turned the pages of her book. When Charlotte stepped away for a moment to get a notebook she had left behind, Thomas took the chance to talk to Elizabeth directly. He said softly, "If there's anything bothering you, Miss Elizabeth, anything at all, I hope you know you can talk to me about it." The girl looked up, her face showing both fear and something like hope. "You don't get it," she said quietly. "Nobody can help us." "Elizabeth," Charlotte's voice rang out through the room when she came back, sharper than Thomas had ever heard it. "Don't forget what Mom says about talking about things that aren't right." Elizabeth quickly withdrew into herself, lowering her head over her book. Charlotte gave Thomas a look that was too wise and old for a 16-year-old girl. That afternoon, Thornton called Thomas back to his office. The plantation owner was in a good mood. He drank brandy and smoked a cigar, even though it was early in the morning. He said right away, the Pembroke's gathering was a big success. Charlotte made a great impression on young Henry Pembroke, who could be a good match for both families. Thomas politely nodded, but he was disgusted by the thought of Charlotte getting married so young, especially since he now knew what kind of business she was going to inherit. "I've been thinking about your job here, Mr. Blackwood," Thornton went on. "Your academic credentials are impressive, but I'm not sure if a man from the North is really the best person to prepare my daughters for their roles in Charleston society." "Have you found my teaching to be lacking?" Thomas asked very carefully. "Not bad, maybe, but not in line with our values." Thornton looked at him through a cloud of cigar smoke. "Please tell me what you think about the strange institution that helps us live the way we do here in the South." It was a carefully planned trap. If he said what he really thought about abolition, he would be fired right away, and maybe worse. He would be betraying his soul if he said he supported slavery. "Mister, I think my job is to teach your daughters about school subjects." "Thornton," Thomas said in a diplomatic way, "parents should handle political and economic issues." Thornton laughed, but it wasn't a warm sound. "Skillfully avoided, Mr. Blackwood. Maybe you have more Southern subtlety than I thought you did." He leaned forward, and his face got harder. "But don't get me wrong. I'm keeping a close eye on you. If I find out that someone is trying to influence my daughters in a bad way, there will be serious consequences." "I understand completely, sir." "Okay." Thornton told him to go away. "You can go." That night, while Thomas was getting ready for bed, someone slipped a folded piece of paper under his door. He opened it carefully and saw a message written in careful, childish handwriting. "Library. The third bookcase from the window. Behind the principles of natural philosophy. Please help us. E." Thomas's heart raced. Elizabeth had put herself in a lot of danger by contacting him. She must have wanted him to find something important. He waited until the house was quiet before going out, and he moved through the dark halls very carefully. He opened the library door, and it creaked a little, which made him stop for a moment, but there were no other sounds. The tall windows let in enough moonlight for people to find their way between the bookcases that were looming over them. Thomas found the third case and ran his fingers along the spines until he found Principles of Natural Philosophy, a huge book that most people wouldn't have needed to take out. A small, leather-bound journal was tucked away behind it, in the space between the book and the back of the shelf. Thomas carefully moved back to where the moonlight was strongest and started to read. Elizabeth owned the journal. The pages were filled with her thoughts on life at Magnolia Manor, which were much more insightful and disturbing than what you would expect from a 14-year-old girl. She wrote about things she heard her parents talking about, visits to the West Wing at midnight, and young women from the quarters who were brought to the house and then sent back, changed and broken. Her descriptions of how Charlotte had changed over the past year were the most chilling. She said that her sister had been slowly brought into the family's secret business, taught to see the enslaved people as nothing more than goods, and prepared to take her mother's place as the person in charge of the ledgers and the breeding stock. Elizabeth's last entries showed her biggest fear, that she was being prepared for a similar role that she really wanted to get away from. She wrote about how her mother was paying more and more attention to her growth and how she talked to Dr. Reynolds told her about her potential and gave her hints that she might soon be expected to watch the tests in the West Wing. The last entry in the journal, which was written just the day before, said, "They want Charlotte to marry Henry Pembroke. They want me to stay here and learn how to do mother's job. I can't be like them. Not me. The river is there. If no one comes to help, forgive me, God." Thomas closed the journal, his hands shaking with both anger and determination. Elizabeth was thinking about killing herself instead of helping her family's terrible business. He had to do something right away. But what could one tutor do against the power of a rich plantation owner in South Carolina before the Civil War? Thomas heard a floorboard creak behind him as he carefully put the journal back behind the book. He turned slowly and saw Charlotte standing in the doorway of the library with a candle in her hand. Her face was a mask of mixed feelings. "I knew she'd get in touch with you eventually," she said softly as she walked into the room and shut the door. "Elizabeth was always the weaker and more sentimental of the two of us." "Is that what you mean by basic human decency?" Thomas asked, his voice sharp. "Feeling?" Charlotte's calmness wavered a little. "You don't get it. I didn't choose any of this. This is the world we were born into. But you don't have to keep doing bad things. Can I?" Charlotte laughed in a sad way. "Where would I go? What would I do? A Southern lady has no money of her own, Mr. Blackwood. Either I marry and become my husband's property, or I stay here and do what I'm told." "What about the women who live there? Don't they have choices too?" Charlotte jumped. "I never said it was okay. I just said that was the way the world is." "Worlds can change," Thomas said, "but it takes guts to do it." Charlotte's face showed a hint of longing for a moment, as if she were seeing the girl she could have been in a different life with different parents. Then her face got hard again. "You've read her diary. You know too much now," she said in a flat, resigned voice. "Father will fire you, or maybe even worse, if you don't tell him you're leaving." Charlotte's eyes got a little bigger. "Are you telling me to lie and betray my family?" Thomas said softly, "I'm asking you to help save your sister, and maybe yourself too." Charlotte was quiet for a long time, and the candlelight made her troubled face look like it was moving. At last, she spoke, but her voice was so low that it was hard to hear. "They want to send Elizabeth to the West Wing tomorrow to watch her first test." She swallowed hard. "If you really want to help her, or any of us, it has to be before then." She said those words and then left the library. The door closed quietly behind her, leaving Thomas alone with the weight of his knowledge and the need to act quickly. It was just after dawn when Thomas heard a soft knock on his door. When he carefully opened it, he saw Elizabeth standing there in her nightgown, pale and shaking with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. "After breakfast they're coming for me," she said in a scared voice. "Mom says it's time for me to learn what I need to do." Thomas let her in and quickly shut the door behind her. "Your sister told me. We have to get you out of here." "But how? Where should I go?" Thomas's heart broke when he heard how desperate Elizabeth sounded. "They would find me. Dad knows people all over Charleston." "Not in Boston," Thomas said firmly. "I have relatives there who would help you." Elizabeth's eyes briefly lit up with hope before it died. "It's not possible. The distance and the risk. And what about the other people? Ruth, Martha, and Mercy's baby?" Thomas was even more determined because of her concern for those who were even more vulnerable than she was, even though she was in danger. One step at a time. "First, we need proof of what's going on here that can't be denied or hidden," Elizabeth said. "The ledgers. Mother's private ones, not just Father's business records. And Dr. Reynolds keeps very detailed notes on the tests." "He does? Where do they keep them?" Elizabeth shuddered as she said, "In the West Wing, in the room they call the office. But only Mother, Father, and the doctor go in there." Thomas thought about the few choices they had. Will the West Wing be empty at any point today? Elizabeth thought about it for a moment. Mother and Father are meeting with Mr. after breakfast. Pembroke about Charlotte's possible engagement. Dr. Reynolds won't get here until noon. That's our window then.
While everyone else is busy, I'll look in the West Wing.
You should stay in the library and act like yourself. And what then? Elizabeth asked, in a small voice. Then we give these records to someone who can help. Thomas wasn't sure who that person might be in pro-slavery Charleston, but he couldn't tell Elizabeth what he was thinking. Maybe a lawyer who is sympathetic, or a newspaper editor. Elizabeth shook her head. Mr. Charleston, you don't get it. Blackwood, the people who could help, won't. The people who could help, can't. Thomas said. Then we'll take the proof north. There are people who want to end slavery who will make sure these crimes are known. They made a deal. Thomas would sneak into the West Wing after breakfast, when everyone was confused about the Pembroke visit. If she needed to, Elizabeth would make up an excuse, like saying she felt faint, which was common for Southern ladies, so no one would be suspicious right away. That morning's breakfast was tense. Mrs. Thornton was very excited about the Pembrokes' upcoming visit, but Charlotte stayed calm and occasionally looked at her sister with a guarded look. Elizabeth picked at her food, and her face was pale but calm. Thornton looked busy with business matters as he read his morning paper. Mr. Blackwood, Mrs. Thornton suddenly spoke to him. The girls will be busy with social duties today. You can think of it as a free day for your own activities. Thank you, Mrs. Thornton. I need to take care of some letters. Maybe in the city? She suggested, with a lot of emphasis. Frederick can get the carriage ready. Thomas saw another attempt to get him off the property, while whatever was going on with Elizabeth in the West Wing was going on. I'm sorry, but some of my letters are very important. If it's okay, I'll work here in my room. Mrs. Smith's face showed a flash of anger. Thornton's face, but she just nodded quickly. As you want. After breakfast, the family split up to get ready for the Pembrokes' arrival. Thomas sat in his room and counted down the minutes until he was sure that Thornton and his wife would be busy with their guests. Then, with great care, he made his way to the West Wing, which was off limits. He had expected the door that connected the two rooms to be locked. Elizabeth had, however, described a different way to get there, a service corridor that the house slaves used to clean the rooms. Thomas found the unmarked door near the back stairs and slipped through, just like she told him to. The air in the West Wing felt different. It was heavier and more oppressive. Heavy curtains covered the windows, letting in only a little bit of light. Thomas moved carefully, knowing that even at this hour, a house slave could be around. The hallway led to a large living room that was decorated in the same elegant style as the rest of the house, but with a clinical coldness that made Thomas shiver. There were a few closed doors beyond this. Thomas was able to find the one that should lead to the office after Elizabeth described it. He was lucky that it was unlocked, something he hadn't dared hope for. He saw that a big desk and filing cabinet took up most of the space inside. There were medical books and bound journals on the walls, which made the room look like a doctor's private study. Thomas went right to the desk and opened drawers until he found what he was looking for. A leather-bound book that was similar to the ledger he saw in Thornton's study, but had more information. This one had names, physical descriptions, medical notes, and cold clinical evaluations of breeding potential. There was a thinner book next to it, Doctor Notes from Reynolds. Thomas opened it up and right away wished he hadn't. The clinical descriptions of exams done on young enslaved women, the detailed records of successful pairings, the tracking of pregnancies, and evaluations of the resulting children were all written down with scientific accuracy, as if the victims were animals instead of people. Thomas's hands shook with rage as he picked up both books and some loose papers that showed letters between Thornton and people in other states. These letters showed that there was a network of similar operations across the South that traded in people who were bred for domestic service or other specialized jobs. As he was about to leave, he saw a third book that was smaller and bound in red leather. When he opened it, he found Mrs. Thornton's private journal, which describes her work in the family business with cold efficiency. Her notes about Charlotte's education and Elizabeth's resistance were the most troubling. They included plans for the younger girl's introduction to her duties, which was set for that very afternoon. Thomas added this book to his collection and started to walk toward the door. But when he heard voices coming from the hallway, he stopped. One was from Mrs. Thornton, her voice sharp with anger. I don't care what Frederick says. The girl needs to start her lessons today. The Pembrokes can wait. Thomas looked around the room in a panic for a place to hide. A thick curtain hid what looked like a closet door in the corner. As the office door opened, he slipped behind it. "Really, Eleanor, this could have waited," Thornton said in an annoyed voice. "Henry Pembroke is willing to give up a lot of money for Charlotte's hand. We shouldn't take the chance of upsetting his dad." "Mrs. Elizabeth's preparation can't be put off any longer," Thornton answered in a cold way. "She's 14 now, the same age I was when my mom first took me to work. We need to start now if she is going to get over her emotional weaknesses." Thomas could see the Thorntons standing by the desk through a small hole in the curtain. Mrs. Thornton suddenly frowned as he looked at the spot where the books had been. She said sharply, "The ledgers and Reynolds's notes are missing." Thornton walked up to the desk, and his face got darker. "I looked at them this morning when they were here. Someone has been in here." Mrs. Thornton's voice was now a threat. "Look in the other rooms. I will call Frederick." Mrs. Thornton walked toward the far door. Thornton pulled a string to call the butler. Thomas stayed frozen behind the curtain, holding the books that could get him in trouble to his chest. His heart was racing so fast that he was afraid they could hear it. His mind raced through all the ways he could get away, but they all seemed blocked. Even if he got out of the office, the wing would soon be full of people looking for him. If the Thorntons found him with the evidence, there was no telling what they would do to protect their terrible business. The noise from the main house gave me an unexpected break. Frederick came to the door and his normally calm face showed signs of anger. "Ma'am, there's a problem that needs your immediate attention. It looks like Miss Elizabeth has passed out in the library. Miss Charlotte is very upset, and the Pembrokes are there to see it." Mrs. Thornton's face went from angry to calculating in a split second. It would be very bad if something happened in public. "Elijah, keep looking here. I'll take care of the girls." Thornton went back to checking the room carefully, getting closer to the curtained closet where Thomas was hiding as she hurried away. The tutor held his breath, knowing that discovery was only a few moments away when something else happened. Ruth, out of breath at the door, said, "Master, come quick. The kitchen is on fire." Thornton paused, obviously torn between continuing his search and dealing with the new problem. "Fire? How bad is it?" "Spreading quickly, sir. The slaves are trying to keep it under control, but God damn it all." Thornton walked up to the door. "Lock this wing down. Nobody comes in until I get back." Thomas understood that this might be his only chance as the sound of his footsteps faded down the hall. He quickly left his hiding place, crossed to the door, and looked out carefully. The hallway was empty for a short time. Ruth stood a few feet away, and her eyes got bigger when she saw him come out with the books. "Mr. Blackwood, Martha told me you might be here. You need to move quickly. The distraction won't last long." "Elizabeth, is she really sick?" Thomas asked quickly. "Charlotte helped her and made her drink something that would make her feel sick," Ruth said quickly. "But they'll be looking for you soon. You have to get those books out of here." Thomas nodded in thanks. "Thanks, Ruth, for all of it." "Sir, don't thank me yet. You are still in the snake's nest." She pointed to the service corridor. "That way is clear for now. If they come looking for me, I'll try to stall them." Thomas hurried into the service corridor, clutching the damning evidence tightly under his arm. He hoped to find safety and justice for the victims of Magnolia Manor. The service corridor took Thomas back to the main part of the house, which was now in chaos. Some servants rushed around with buckets of water to the kitchen wing, while others tried to keep the guests calm. Thomas saw Elizabeth lying on a couch in the drawing room through an open door. Charlotte was fanning her pale face while Mrs. Thornton spoke softly to the worried Pembrokes. Thomas took advantage of the confusion to quickly get to his room, where he hid the stolen ledgers and journals at the bottom of his suitcase. He then quickly packed his most important things because he knew he couldn't stay at Magnolia Manor for any longer than he had to. The fire was a helpful distraction, but it was also a problem. It would be hard to leave the property without drawing attention because of all the noise. Thomas had to get himself, the proof, and Elizabeth off the plantation before the Thorntons found out that their secrets had been leaked. A soft knock on his door almost made his heart stop. He opened it carefully and saw Charlotte standing there. Her perfect calm was finally starting to break down. "They'll find out what you've done soon," she said right away, walking into the room and shutting the door. "The fire is being put out. Father will be back in the West Wing in less than an hour." "How is Liz?" Thomas asked in a hurry. Charlotte said, "She's getting over her spell. Mom thinks it's just nerves about having to take on family duties for the first time. She told Elizabeth to stay in her room and rest until this afternoon." Thomas looked closely at Charlotte's face to see if there were any signs of betrayal. "Why are you saying this to me? Why are you helping us now after all this time defending what your family does?" Charlotte's carefully built facade fell apart a little, showing the troubled young woman underneath. "Elizabeth was right about you. You're not like everyone else. You see all of us as people, not as things or jobs." She took a breath that made her shudder. "And because I can't stand to see my sister turn into what I've become." "Come with us," Thomas said without thinking. "It's not too late for you, either." Charlotte shook her head in sadness. "It's for me. I've already been a part of, watched, and recorded. I'm in on it now." Her voice became stronger with determination. "But we can still save Elizabeth, and maybe some of the others too, thanks to your evidence. How do we get to Elizabeth and then leave the property?" "The fire has caused most of the household staff to leave the main building. At the end of the east corridor is Elizabeth's room." Charlotte pulled a small key out of her pocket. "This unlocks the gate to the back garden. There is a path through the woods that goes to the river road on the other side. The Jenkins farm is half a mile downstream. Mr. Oldfather doesn't like Jenkins. He might be able to help you get to Charleston." Thomas took the key, surprised by how much Charlotte helped him. "What will happen to you if we find out we're missing?" Charlotte said with a sad smile. "I'll say I don't know. I've gotten very good at being the perfect Southern daughter. No one will think I helped you get away." Thomas warned, "The ledgers point to you too. Your father's business will fail once it comes to light. You will lose your place in Charleston society." Charlotte finished for him. "Maybe that's the cost of redemption." She walked toward the door and stopped with her hand on the knob. "Wait 20 minutes, then go see Elizabeth. I'll make sure Mother is busy with the Pembrokes until then." When Charlotte left, Thomas finished getting ready by hiding the incriminating books in his clothes and bags so that they wouldn't be found if they were stopped. When the time came, he carefully made his way to the east corridor, passing several servants who were busy with other things without raising any alarms. The door to Elizabeth's house was open. He found her sitting tensely on the edge of her bed, already dressed in a simple travel outfit with a small suitcase next to her. She whispered, "Charlotte said you'd come," and then she stood up right away. "Do you have the ledgers?" "Everything. Your sister gave me the key to the gate to the garden. There's a way." "I know it," Elizabeth said. "I've dreamed of using it to get away more times than I can count, but I've never had the guts to do it. Until you got here." There were tears in her eyes that she hadn't shed yet. They quietly walked down the hallway and down a side staircase that Charlotte had suggested, which wasn't used very often. As promised, the garden door was unlocked, and they walked into the well-kept formal garden, where the high hedges kept them out of sight of the windows of the main house. As they got closer to the back gate, a voice behind them yelled, "Mr. Blackwood! Miss Elizabeth!" They turned around and saw Frederick at the door to the garden, his old face set in lines of grim determination. "I can't let you leave the property, Mr. Thornton would think I was not doing my job well." Thomas stepped in front of Elizabeth to protect her. "Frederick, you know what goes on in this house. You've worked for the family for many years. You can't really agree with." "I don't allow anything," the butler said, his voice suddenly tired. "I just get by, like everyone else does, in their own way." He walked up slowly, with his hands in plain sight, to show he wasn't carrying a weapon. "But the question now is not what I agree with, but what I will allow." Elizabeth held Thomas's arm tightly, scared. "Please, Frederick, you have known me since the day I was born. You've seen what they want me to become." Frederick stood still for a long time, and you could see the conflict in his old eyes. Then he stepped aside, with a barely noticeable nod. "I didn't see anything," he said quietly. "I was busy with the fire in the kitchen. A lot of time had passed by the time I remembered to check on Miss Elizabeth." Thomas felt a wave of relief. "Thanks. Don't thank me," Frederick said sharply. "Just make sure that what you take from here serves justice and not just scandal. A lot of lives are at stake, mister. Blackwood. Not just the Thornton family. Frederick turned and walked slowly back toward the house, his shoulders bent as if he were carrying an invisible weight. Thomas opened the garden gate, and he and Elizabeth quickly walked down the overgrown path that led into the woods around Magnolia Manor. The heat in July was unbearable under the trees, but fear pushed them on. They didn't talk until they were far away from the plantation. "They'll come after us," Elizabeth said as they stopped by a small stream to drink. "Father won't let this evidence get away from him, and he definitely won't let me go without a fight." "Then we need to move fast," Thomas said as he helped her across the slippery stones. "We can get on a northern ship once we get to Charleston. I have friends in Boston who will help us get these ledgers to people who can do something about them." Elizabeth didn't seem sure. "Will it matter? The laws still protect men like my father, even with proof." "Maybe not in South Carolina," Thomas said, "but in the North, there are newspapers that will tell the truth. There are people in Washington who want to end slavery. If things are ever going to change, people need to know what goes on at places like Magnolia Manor." They kept flying through the woods until they finally came out on the river road that Charlotte had told them about. They could see the Jenkins farm in the distance. It wasn't as big as the Thornton plantation, but it was their first hope of a safe place to stay. But as they got closer to the farmhouse, Thomas's heart sank. Two of Thornton's men were standing in the yard on horseback, talking to an old farmer who could only be Mr. Jenkins. Thornton had somehow guessed where they would escape. "We need to hide," Thomas whispered quickly, pulling Elizabeth back toward the trees. "They're already looking for us." Elizabeth's face turned white. "The river," she said in a desperate voice. "Downstream, about a quarter mile, there's a hut for fishermen. We might be able to find a boat." They stayed in the trees, moving along the road but out of sight of anyone looking for them. Thomas could hear distant shouts as more of Thornton's men joined the search, spreading out across his huge property and beyond. The fisherman's hut was empty. It was a simple wooden building on stilts above the riverbank. There was an old flat-bottomed boat underneath it, partly hidden in the reeds. It looked like it was still in good shape. Elizabeth said as they pulled the boat to the water's edge, "The river goes straight to Charleston. We might not be seen if we stay close to the bank and travel at night." Thomas helped Elizabeth get into the boat, then pushed it into the slow-moving water. He jumped in when it was free of the bank. He used a pole he found near the hut to steer them into the current, staying close to the trees that hung over them to stay hidden. Elizabeth sat huddled in the bow, her face a mix of fear and determination as Magnolia Manor faded into the distance. "I never thought I'd really leave," she said in a whisper. "Everything I've ever done has been inside those walls." Thomas said to her, "You're very brave," and he meant it. Most people would have accepted what happened to them, like Charlotte did. Thomas said softly, "Your sister made her choice, and in the end, she helped us get away. Maybe that's how she fights back." As the afternoon turned into evening, they kept going downriver, with the stolen ledgers and journals proof of Magnolia Manor's darkest secrets safely between them. They knew that Thornton would be using every resource he had to get his daughter back and the evidence of his crimes that would hurt him. The sun started to go down over the river, making long shadows on the water. The lights of Charleston in the distance called out to them. They promised safety, but they were also the center of the society that allowed the horrors of Magnolia Manor to happen. Thomas and Elizabeth's journey was far from over, and there were still many serious dangers ahead. But as the boat gently rocked, and with the truth in their hands and the desire for justice in their hearts, there was a fragile hope that the shadows of Magnolia Manor might finally be able to see the light of day. This was just the start. Part 2 is still dark. Sign up now so you don't miss it.